Can you recall early dreams that left you behind because they seemed impossible? Can you recall other people talking you out of the good desires of your heart? Don't hold back. Decide what it is that you want. Decide what it is that you want to be. Decide what it is you wanted to do. Decide what it is you want to have. Say to yourself, I decide to be happy. I decide to be healthy. I decide to be successful and prosperous. Beginning in the 1930s, the federal government authorized broadcasting licenses to TV and radio networks as long as they reserved airtime for programs deemed to be in the, quote, public interest, end quote. In 1960, the Federal Communication Commission, or FCC, ruled that networks could sell this airtime and still receive credit for offering public interest content. Evangelical, charismatic, less mainstream religious institutions jumped at the opportunity to spread their message, and a new public persona was born, the televangelist. One of the most unique preachers amongst these TV juggernauts was a man with a very unique name, Frederick Ike, better known as Reverend Ike. Reverend Ike became known not only for teaching the prosperity gospel like his peers, but also for promoting an entirely new definition of God. You are watching Black Belief. Be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so that you never miss a new video. Frederick Joseph Ike II was born in Ridgeland, South Carolina on June 1, 1935, to his parents Frederick Fred Joseph Ike and Rema Matthews. Rema was the granddaughter of a house slave named Nancy who'd been assaulted by a Georgia slave master. Fred was a descendant of immigrants who came to Savannah, Georgia from the Dutch East Indies, also known as the Netherlands Antilles. Ike is a Dutch name which means little acorn carrier. Both Fred and Rema lived in the shadow of the Jim Crow system of racial discrimination, but each responded in different ways. Rema, a teacher, embraced a strict life of religious piety and contentment, which she believed would be rewarded with an afterlife in heaven, while also avoiding the ire of angry whites. Fred, meanwhile, was a gifted architect who resented the discrimination that limited his success. He gained a reputation for working hard and dealing honestly with his clients, which allowed him to build a lucrative business. Eventually, he became one of the more wealthier Black men in the area. He was also a pastor, having grown up with a demanding, strict father who forced him to memorize long passages from the Bible. The pair met, fell in love, and married. Soon they gave birth to Frederick II. Fred was able to provide a comfortable life for his young family. Still, he wanted more. Rema became nervous about her husband's ambition and unwillingness to be satisfied with what they already had. Aside from her beliefs that too much money was sinful and greedy, she also feared backlash from the racist society if her family was perceived as too uppity and too successful. When Fred began talking about starting his own contracting company, Rema decided she had had enough. She believed her husband was too concerned with worldly possessions and material success. One day while Fred was at work, Rema arranged for a moving company to come pack up all of her and her son's belongings and quietly moved into a small apartment across town. When Fred came home that day, he was stunned. All of the dishes, furniture, and clothes were gone. So too was his wife and son. A years-long battle between the couple began. Rema was determined to prove that she didn't need her husband's money or big dreams to survive. Fred swore he'd never give a dime to his ex-wife, even to support his own son, out of the anger and heartbreak he felt when she left. Rema's sudden loss of her husband's financial support left her and her son destitute. She had a job teaching 7 grades in a one-room schoolhouse for $65 a month. Lacking a car, she walked with her son to the school daily, 4 miles each way. She rarely took days off, even when she or her son were sick. Frederick realized just how poor he was when he got a little bit older and couldn't afford the 7 cents for lunch at school. There was not enough food to eat at home and no new clothes to wear. His classmates taunted him daily. His only saving grace was that his mother had kept her married name, so Frederick wasn't viewed as a fatherless boy in the community. Rema was also ridiculed. The community took some small twisted pleasure in seeing a woman who was relatively more educated than other Black people of her time struggles so much financially. Awkwardly, the ex-spouses continued to live in the same area, but maintained a cold, uncomfortable distance from each other. A young Frederick, meanwhile, would continue to have a relationship with his father, all while knowing his father's firm stance against giving him or his mother any financial support. On one occasion, Frederick complained about his old, worn-out shoes that hurt his feet when he and his mother walked to school each day. His mother told him that she simply didn't have any money to buy any new shoes. When he asked his father, Fred Sr. told his mother, "You took that boy away from me. You can buy him new shoes." The response stung. At that moment, Frederick made up his mind to never ask his father for anything again. Fred continued to pursue his business ambitions. He bought farmland, empty lots for development, and invested in businesses, all while maintaining his standing as a preacher. Rima committed herself all the more deeply to the dominant theology of her time, which taught that suffering had a purpose and would be alleviated in the afterlife when faithful Christians went to heaven. She enforced strict routines for cleaning, shopping, cooking, and other household activities. Aside from a few approved hymns, singing was not allowed. There was only one time that Rima let her son see a different side of her. One night she called him into her room and told him to help her pull a large trunk from under her bed. She opened the trunk and took out its contents one by one: a gold linen tablecloth, china dishes, silver utensils, crystal glasses, napkins, necklaces, bracelets, rings, and 2 silver mirrors with the letter R engraved on them. Frederick was amazed at the luxurious items he had never seen before. He sat stunned as his mother nostalgically recounted a story about each one. She reminisced about her youth, about the friends she used to have, and the parties she used to attend before she had gotten married. At some point, Frederick looked up at his mom and asked when they would ever be able to use some of these items. She told her son that they would use them one day when company came to visit. Over the ensuing years, a few close relatives would come to visit, but the day for using his mother's hidden treasures would never come. Around the age of 13, Frederick, his mother, and his grandmother moved to a new home located across the street from the local juke joint. His mother forbade him from even passing the juke joint on the same side of the street. Within a week of the family moving there, a man was stabbed to death. Eventually, the establishment expanded its repertoire into gospel music and began hosting gospel meetings 3 times per week. Despite his mother's warnings, an adolescent Frederick began sneaking over to get a glimpse of some of their meetings. One night, he got the courage to walk in and sit in the back of the room. He usually attended church at the local Baptist congregation, but Frederick was more interested in the Pentecostal worship style of the juke joint services. On the night that he attended, the pastor was absent, so the congregation passed the Bible around the room, allowing each person to read a passage as the music played. The Bible would typically only be given to those who were known and liked amongst the congregants. Frederick didn't expect he'd be chosen to read that night. Lo and behold, the woman in front of him caught the Holy Spirit and fainted. Suddenly, the Bible was thrust into Frederick's hands. Before he knew it, he was reading from the book of Romans, and the room was buzzing with excitement. Being raised by a teacher gave him a reading ability, which he had never before used in public. Everyone agreed that the boy had a gift. Word got to his father. Everyone was talking about how Frederick had a gift for preaching. Fred Sr. quickly stepped in. Using his connections within the Baptist community in South Carolina, he helped his son prepare for the ordination examination. At 14, Frederick Ike II became an ordained Baptist minister. At 15, he was appointed to the position of assistant pastor at Bible Way Baptist Church. His career at the local church would come to a halt when he filled in for the lead pastor one Sunday. He invited the local school band to play during the service. The attendees loved it, but the church leadership were not pleased. The secular talents of an outside band were not considered appropriate for church activities. The lead pastor and deacons voted to fire Frederick from his position. He was devastated and scared about what he would do next. He didn't want to have to face his father and explain the situation. His mother was already disappointed and had withdrawn her own membership from the church out of embarrassment. Around this time, he received a letter which awarded him a scholarship to attend the International Christian Youth Festival in Buffalo, New York. The scholarship would cover his tuition, room, and board for the 2-week event. but he would be responsible for his transportation to New York. Now that he was fired, he no longer could count on pay from the church, and he no longer had the positive work references to earn money preaching at other churches in the surrounding area. Desperate for money, he tried picking cotton for a local white landowner. One day of hard work under the hot sun was all it took before he quit. He was running out of options. He headed to the juke joint to sit and think about what to do next. Suddenly, he was approached by a prostitute that worked in the establishment. Seeing he was down, she asked what was wrong, and Frederick told her the whole story. The lively service, the deacons firing him, and the scholarship that he simply couldn't let slip away. After listening intently, she pulled out a checkbook from her bosom and asked to borrow a pen. She wrote a check for the full cost of the trip to New York. By late August, he was on a bus headed out of Ridgeland towards a train station that would take him to New York. He had avoided talking to his father all summer and didn't tell him about the festival. His mother, meanwhile, approved of his trip, seeing it as a way to distance him and her from his termination at the church. That summer, Frederick had been rejected by pious churchgoers and given a helping hand from a societal outcast. It was a lesson he would never forget. At the festival, the young ex-pastor from South Carolina impressed everyone, including a minister from New York. At the end of the event, the minister pulled Frederick aside and offered him a job in exchange for helping to pay his tuition at any New York school of his choice. In 1952, he enrolled at the Church of Christ Bible Institute, a Baptist Bible training school governed by an organization called the American Bible Institute. He soon realized that the work-study opportunity offered by the minister was not what it seemed. First, not all his school expenses were covered. The minister allowed him the use of a small apartment, but food and clothing to endure the New York winters was not included. Second, he was expected to be available at almost any time to run errands or chauffeur his patron around the city. Over 4 years, Frederick struggled to come up with the additional funds to cover his education, keep up with his schoolwork, and meet his obligations to the minister. He felt discouraged looking at the New York religious landscape. Dozens of up-and-coming ministers fiercely competed for followers, with little more than a personal calling in a storefront church. During his last year, he transferred to the Manhattan Institute, another institution run by the American Bible Institute. He almost failed to matriculate when the faculty objected to his final thesis, where he questioned the infallibility of the Bible and expressed skepticism in a punitive God. Leadership pressured Frederick to withdraw, but he refused. He leveraged his reputation for paying his tuition and fees on time and in cash. He told the fledgling school that he would pay, but only if he was awarded his degree. In June of 1956, he received a bachelor's degree in theology. After graduation, he enlisted in the Air Force as a chaplain service specialist for 2 years. During his service, he read as many books on philosophy and religion as he could. When he returned to his boyhood home of Ridgeland, South Carolina in 1958, he was a fully grown, fully changed man. The racial segregation from Frederick's childhood had only gotten worse by the 1950s. One exception was the radio. Few radio stations were Black-owned, but all white radio stations allowed Black people to reserve time as long as they paid. Frederick reserved a 15-minute Sunday slot using $241 that he had saved during his time in the service. He assured the station owner that he would pay on time and in cash going forward. His radio broadcasts were an instant success. A local supporter gifted him a used Chevrolet Coupe, which gave him the opportunity to travel to more rural areas of South Carolina where churches had not yet been established. By pre-recording his broadcasts, he was able to travel throughout these areas for weeks at a time and grow his following from both radio and in-person presentations. Letters with prayer requests and donations poured in. People throughout South Carolina and as far as Georgia contacted him. The increase in earnings allowed him to provide well for his mother and himself. In 1959, he and 13 other leaders began planning to create a church. These efforts culminated in the creation of the United Church of Jesus Christ for All People in Beaufort, South Carolina in 1962. But like his father, Frederick II wasn't satisfied. The speaking in tongues and emotional outbursts at his meetings were exciting at first, but he was certain that there was something spiritually greater that he was meant to achieve. Over the following months, he found his answer. He began attending healing services in the area. He noticed that most faith healers were using their knowledge of human psychology to relieve various ailments. He began to believe that these healers were acting as conduits, helping people change their mental states, which in turn had the power to address physical problems. This idea was further supported by what he had learned about psychosomatic disorders, which were conditions where a person's mental state led to physical symptoms. He also recalled several biblical passages which recounted how the disciples were able to use their faith in Jesus Christ to heal people. Science and faith seemed to confirm what Frederick was witnessing firsthand at these faith healing meetings. But could he become a conduit as well? He received a letter from a woman living about 15 miles outside Ridgeland, whose name was Walisa Martin. After her husband died, Walisa's long-term battle with gout worsened. She could barely stand or walk. She sat in pain, hoping for the day when she could travel to Boston to visit her sister's family. With her illness, it would be impossible for her to complete the journey. She had already tried the mainstream medical treatments like Epsom salt soaks and prescribed medicines to no avail. Sometimes at night, she prayed for God to take her life. After hearing Frederick's reassuring voice over the radio one night, she decided to see if he could help. Frederick read her letter many times. He was inspired by her desire to be healed in order to reunite with her family and move to a new place. He had also been researching how he could begin incorporating healing into his ministry. Walisa seemed like a good test case. Frederick sent Walisa a letter stating that he would broadcast an episode specifically for her on the following Sunday. At the time of the broadcast, she sat near the radio on the edge of the bed, trying her best to stay awake. Finally, she heard her name. "I want you, Walisa Martin. I want you to kneel down by your radio. Kneel down right now and pray with me. Can you do that?" She couldn't kneel down, but she stretched her feet until they touched the radio, bracing herself against the excruciating pain until the broadcast was over. Over the next few days, there was no change. The pain was just as bad as before. But one evening, she started to get out of her bed and put her feet on the floor. As she stood up, she realized the pain was gone. In disbelief, she began trying to walk around the room. She confirmed there was no more pain. When she went to the doctor, he was supposedly shocked that the swelling at her feet had decreased dramatically. The doctor believed that her relief was due to the pills he had prescribed to her, but Walisa had secretly stopped taking the pills right around the time that she listened to Frederick's broadcast. She was finally able to travel to meet her family. She sent Frederick a letter thanking him and asking if he could come to Boston to visit her sister's church to help others. The church agreed to pay his travel expenses and an honorarium for his services. Frederick was more than happy to agree. Reverend Ike taught a philosophy which he called by many names: thinkonomics, law of mind, divine mind, and positive self-image psychology. His beliefs were a variation of New Thought, the 19th century philosophy introduced by Dr. Phineas Quimby and further popularized by one of his patients, Mary Baker Eddy. New Thought describes a diverse set of views which emphasize the healing power of the mind. Mary Baker Eddy claimed that while reading a story in the Bible about a healing, she was healed from injuries resulting from a fall. Many New Thought adherents believe that the disciples in the Bible used the Spirit of Jesus to heal the sick, and that his power remains available today. Eddy believed that the material world was an illusion which resulted from flawed mental states. She also taught that people could be harmed by the thoughts of others. In 1879, Eddy founded the Church of Christ Scientists, whose goal was to restore so-called primitive Christianity and its lost element of healing. She didn't explicitly prohibit members from seeking medical care, but over time, members placed increasingly more emphasis on spiritual healing as a sign of faith. Hundreds of adults and children have died from treatable conditions based on a culture within the Christian Scientist community that rejects conventional medicine. New Thought influenced many prominent leaders, including Father Divine, leader of the International Peace Mission Movement, Napoleon Hill, author of Think and Grow Rich, which was published in 1937, Norman Vincent Peale, author of the 1952 best-selling book entitled The Power of Positive Thinking, and Neville Goddard, author of the popular book entitled Resurrection, which was published in 1966. Goddard, in particular, was one of Ike Coder's biggest influences. Neville Lancelot Goddard was born in Barbados into an Anglican family in 1905. He immigrated to New York City, where he found work as a dancer and entertainer. In the 1930s, Goddard embraced the teachings of an Ethiopian-born rabbi named Abdullah, who taught him Hebrew, Kabbalah, and other esoteric ideologies. Inspired by these teachings, Goddard began authoring books expressing his own philosophy. He promoted the Bible as a canon of ideas instead of stories about real historical people. Jesus, for example, was a character meant to exemplify the ideals of the divine, which every person could obtain through a process called self-creation. He taught that man had control over creation through their subconscious mind. The subconscious mind was acted upon and reacted to the conscious mind. He taught that the root of all diseases, sometimes called dis-ease, was the result of doubt or fear in the subconscious mind. Goddard taught that people should profess, "I am healthy," or "I am wealthy," instead of "I will be healthy," or "I will be wealthy." He believed that people could only attract what they were, not what they aspired or hoped to be. The problem, according to this teaching, was that the conscious mind was constantly being bombarded by outside forces with negative messages. Like Goddard, Ike Coder believed that the power of God could be used to heal, and that this power resided within each individual. In order to achieve healing, happiness, and wealth, he encouraged his supporters to appeal to the God within themselves. Using the method of visualization, Ike Coder taught people to imagine themselves as successful people and to recite affirmations weekly as they work towards their goals. The conscious mind could feed the subconscious mind with messages of poverty, oppression, and despair. The goal of Reverend Ike Coder's program was to teach people to achieve mastery over the conscious mind by exercising discipline and rejecting negative thinking and doubt. He criticized the fundamentalist religion that his mother had taught him, which he called pie in the sky, by and by theology. He believed this perspective encouraged people to embrace suffering during their life in the hopes that they would be rewarded after death. He rejected the idea of a heaven or hell in the afterlife. Instead, he preached that people were living in heaven or hell on earth based on their state of mind. He encouraged people to focus on the here and now. He believed that life would never cease to exist. After people died, they would leave their bodies, but they would continue to live in another form. Most outside observers were fixated on Reverend Ike Coder's wealth. Among other comforts, his church provided 16 Rolls Royces for his personal use, 2 homes in New York, 2 homes in California, and a $1,000 a week clothing allowance. In 1972, documents estimated that the ministry was bringing in $6 million per year. The ministry taught a unique variant of the prosperity gospel, which was itself a Protestant Christian adaptation of New Thought theology. The prosperity gospel taught that salvation through Jesus Christ not only offered eternal life after death, but also material wealth and health during one's life. The theology is also called Name It, Claim It, Health and Wealth, and Word of Faith. Believers were invited to verbally name the things they wanted, to claim or boldly declare that these things would be granted based on their personal faith, and to sow a seed, which meant making a monetary donation to a specific ministry. Healing services would also be held, where people were told that if they had sufficient faith, their chronic illnesses could be resolved. A notable difference between Reverend Ike Coder and his contemporaries was his more metaphysical, universal conception of God within every human being. The source of wealth, happiness, and health, therefore, emanated from within each person, instead of from an outside, omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent source. The church was candid about its teachings on tithing, known as the law of increase. They claimed that tithes were owed to the original source of all things. Therefore, tithing was not a gift, reward, charity, or payment for services. Instead, tithing kept the giver in contact with the source of all. Donating to the church was compared to cultivating agriculture, according to 2 Corinthians 9:6, which reads, "Whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. Whoever sows generously will also reap generously." Several followers of the ministry testified that they came into sudden wealth and success after donating to Reverend Ike Coder. When confronted about his profits, he explained that other pastors were hypocritical about money. They demonized it, but still asked their parishioners to donate it. He told his audiences that he was proud to be financially successful and would make no apologies for it. To him, his wealth was its own testimonial, evidence that his popular slogan rang true: "You cannot lose with the stuff I use." In addition to mental techniques, Ike provided physical tools. He leveraged TV and toll-free calling to bridge the gap between the millions wanting to hear his message and his finite presence. After calling a toll-free number, people would redeem an offer to receive a free prayer bracelet. Enclosed with the bracelet would be a message stating that it was being lent to the caller and that they should wear it that night and return it by mail the next day. The letter also instructed the recipient to send no less than $15 back with the bracelet. Giving is the door through which you receive. So do not send back this prayer bracelet without enclosing the faith, love, and obedience donation. That would shut the door on your blessings, the letter warned. Another page included various testimonies from people who claimed that after they sent back the bracelet with money, they later won the lottery, had criminal cases dismissed against them, or were healed of some ailment. Several weeks later, after the first call, another letter would arrive. This one would include a glow-in-the-dark cross. The letter would once again tell the reader that the cross was alone, meant to be placed next to their bed for one night only. They were asked to send the cross back the next day, this time with no less than $20. Borrow the money to give if you have to. Don't tell anybody what you are doing, the letter said. The ministry also sent so-called money sheets, which were pieces of paper printed with pictures of money on them. The sheets included finger-sized holes, which allowed a person to grasp the page as if they were holding the money. Hopefuls were asked to stand in front of the mirror, holding the sheets, and to gain the satisfaction of looking at themselves in the mirror, seeing themselves with money. Then there were the money seeds, which were sheets of paper made to look similar to $20 bills. These sheets included blank lines, allowing a person to write what they were praying for and to sign their name. A checkbox near the lines had text which read, "I am enclosing my $20 money seed." Recipients were told to send $20 a week for 3 weeks in order to manifest their desires. Prayer cloths, blessed by Ike and his team, were also a bestseller. Interestingly, he rejected the use of horoscopes and the identification with zodiac signs in general. He taught that the results from astrology were useless and warned against even reading horoscope predictions, which could sometimes be negative. The positive self-image psychology was also against welfare and other government poverty programs. Reverend Ike rejected the idea that society had a responsibility to the individual. While this perspective was not unique amongst Black American religious groups, by the 1960s his views began to conflict with a growing embrace of more socialist policies within the Black community. In 1968, Ike declined an invitation to participate in the Poor People's March in Washington, D.C. He firmly rejected the name of the march, which he felt wrongly encouraged people to embrace identifying with poverty. Being poor has become a status symbol. People are getting damn proud of their poverty, even banding together and saying, "Look, we're poor," he said in one of his speeches. He often said that he didn't want to talk about Black power, he wanted to talk about green power. He also derided what he called a victim mentality or victim consciousness among some Black political movements. At one point he said, "I'm not a Black preacher, I'm a green preacher. I quit being a Black preacher millions of dollars ago." In lieu of political protest, the Reverend preferred private charity. He privately paid for school for less fortunate students, donated to families in need, and ran programs through his church to help the community, including a prison ministry. In the 1980s, when asked for his views about South African apartheid, he expressed support for the Black South Africans, who he believed would eventually overcome their oppression. He indicated that he had donated to private causes to support the indigenous South Africans' plight. Supporters insisted that underneath their pastor's lavish lifestyle in public, he was more than generous in private. Still, the Reverend maintained that the best thing you can do for the poor is not be one of them. Despite acting as the final authority in his organization, Reverend Ike downplayed his own importance. He insisted that he was merely a conduit, a guide helping people to discover the power of source within themselves. In 1964, Frederick married Maid Dent, an educator he met while she was attending one of his services in Boston. Eula was from Newport News, Virginia. She had been raised with 6 siblings in the Pentecostal church, and she taught herself to play piano by ear. She attended Virginia State College on a partial scholarship, where she earned a degree in business education. She then went to Boston College on a full scholarship, where she got her master's degree in special education. After graduation, she accepted a position with an organization called the Catholic Guild for the Blind, where she worked with blind children. One day, a roommate invited her to one of Frederick's services. At the service, the original piano player wasn't working out. A mutual friend, who was also an usher at the service, knew about Eula's piano playing abilities and begged her to step in. After some time, she agreed. The piano was so large that it prevented her from seeing the pastor on stage. But after she finished playing and began to go back to her seat, she caught a glimpse of the young, handsome Reverend who was preaching that night. Eula had thoroughly enjoyed the service, so she decided to come with her friends several more times. One night after a meeting, Frederick's chauffeur slipped her a letter. Enclosed was a note asking her if she would be interested in meeting with the pastor for lunch. At first, she told the chauffeur that she'd have to think about it, but the young man begged her for an answer. He'd been told by Frederick not to let her go without one, and feared he might even be fired if he didn't get a yes or no. Flattered by the persistence, Eula said yes. The pair dated for over a year before Frederick proposed, and they married in a courthouse ceremony in Providence, Rhode Island. Once married, Eula Eichenkoder committed herself to running the business side of her husband's ministry. By the time of their marriage, Frederick Eichenkoder had 2 churches, United Church in Beaufort, South Carolina, and Miracle Temple in Boston, Massachusetts. In Beaufort, United Church existed under a mix of earlier, more conservative versions of Frederick's teachings and some of his newer, more refined ideas. As his following grew, so too did his spiritual philosophy. An umbrella organization called the United Christian Evangelistic Association was formed in Boston. United Church in South Carolina had leadership in place, but their founding pastor was increasingly absent. When Frederick's mother, Rima, had a stroke, however, he rushed back to South Carolina to be at her side. Unlike his childhood self, an adult Frederick Eichenkoder tried to challenge his mother's outlook. He tried to encourage her to change her negative thinking so that she could heal herself. He insisted that she didn't have to be sick, if only she could stop her negative thinking. His mother firmly rejected this idea, saying, "You need to understand right now, son. That's all there is in life, suffering. Black people were put here to suffer, but we will achieve a righteous place in the kingdom of heaven." Giving his mother some of the money he was making as a minister seemed to be the only thing that temporarily lifted her spirits. But even then, she never truly believed that her son was earning the money through his ministry alone. In 1965, Rima was released from the hospital to spend her last days at home. She died shortly after. Frederick made funeral arrangements and invited relatives from nearby. He selected one of her elegant gowns from that old trunk that his mother had shown to him as a child for her to be buried in. After the funeral, he made his way to the cemetery. He noticed that there were fewer relatives present at the burial than were present at the church. After the burial of his mother, he headed back to the house where his mother had raised him as a child and where she had passed away. As he approached the property, he saw some of the relatives who'd been absent at the gravesite, loading several suitcases in their truck before quickly driving away. When he entered the house, everything had been cleaned out. Her furniture, china, photos, rugs were all gone. He ran up the stairs to her room and saw that her special trunk, her hidden treasures, was ransacked. When Frederick regained his senses, he left for Boston. The church he had built in South Carolina would continue on with him visiting once a month to preach, but he never stayed in South Carolina permanently again. Being there was a painful reminder that his mother had never really been able to experience heaven in the here and now. The same year that Rima died, the Eichenkoders' first and only child was born, Xavier Frederick Eichenkoder III. By 1967, the organization was ready to enter the New York religious scene. Years before, as a student, Frederick had been intimidated by the competitive environment amongst preachers in New York City. But after building 2 successful churches in the South and Northeast, he was ready for the Big Apple. He purchased the historic Loew's 175th Street Theater, located on the corner of Broadway and 175th Street, for $650,000. The building had served as one of the premier movie theaters in the country since the 1930s. Once purchased, Ike Coder renamed the location to the United Palace. In order to fit his name on the movie theater marquee, he shortened it to Reverend Ike. The Ike Coder spent the following years and millions of dollars restoring the historic building. The theater was eventually designated as a New York City landmark. The success at the United Palace was the crown jewel of a ministry that had started 10 years earlier in a small South Carolina town. With this location as his base, Reverend Ike traveled around the country preaching to sold-out stadiums, spreading his message of the mind. In 1972, the Science of Living Institute was created as the educational arm of the movement. It distributed the theology as its own school of thought, separate from that of the United Church and United Palace presentations. The peak of Reverend Ike's reach was evidenced by a New York Times article about his work published on Sunday, March 9, 1975, entitled The Golden Gospel of Rev Ike. Featuring pictures of his wardrobe, jewelry, and Rolls Royces, the article made sure to zero in on the most eye-catching parts of Reverend Ike's message. Unlearn sickness and no health. Unlearn poverty and no prosperity. Learn how to break every limitation and solve every problem yourself. Poverty can be unlearned and overcome, not through government grants and welfare handouts, but through mind power. God lives in all of us in the form of mind power. Each man is his own almighty. Reverend Ike's image would remain prosperous and unsullied until relatively late in his life. Controversy around the science of living was mostly concerned with the promotion of wealth and the claims that Reverend Ike was taking advantage of the poor. In 1995, a new scandal emerged when a man named Andrew Brown filed a $100 million lawsuit accusing the minister of sexual misconduct. Brown, a 25-year-old who had worked as Reverend Ike's personal assistant for $500 a week, alleged that the Reverend had made sexual advances towards him several times and punished him professionally when he refused. Brown's attorney further claimed that his team was prepared to present the testimony of other staff members who had also been victimized. Reverend Ike called the lawsuit a $100 million lie and asked, "Is Reverend Ike too black to be so rich? Is there a racial conspiracy here?" The case fell out of the headlines as it moved through the courts. It would be mentioned again when another man named Augusto Medina filed another lawsuit. Medina was hired in 2001 by the United Christian Evangelistic Association, or UCEA, as Reverend Ike's personal assistant. He claimed that over the course of 3 years, he was forced to perform sexual acts on Reverend Ike at least 6 times. He further claimed that though he didn't want to do so, he complied out of fear of losing his job. When he began to refuse, he alleged that Reverend Ike punished him by belittling him, making him work outside in the hot sun until he passed out, and assigning him additional work. In 2004, he filed an Equal Opportunity Commission charge of discrimination and later filed a lawsuit alleging assault, battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, negligent retention and/or negligent supervision, and sexual harassment. The counts of assault were later dismissed. On July 28, 2009, Reverend Frederick Ike Coder II died in Los Angeles, California, from stroke complications. He had turned over leadership of his ministry to his son a month before his death. Xavier studied philosophy at Columbia University and counseling psychology at Pacifica Graduate Institute. He also studied drumming techniques from indigenous cultures from Peru, Burkina Faso, Zimbabwe, and Kenya. At 18, Xavier was ordained as a minister within the UCEA and later became the spiritual director of United Palace after his father's death. After a lengthy legal process, a jury found in favor of the plaintiff on all counts in the Medina case. Before the jury's verdict was entered into the record, a settlement was reached. A motion from the UCEA to seal the court records was denied in 2010. The United Church of Jesus Christ for All People in Beaufort, South Carolina is still open today. On November 28, 2023, a groundbreaking ceremony was held on the church's property for the construction of the Reverend Ike Resource Center. The center will act as a community center and museum containing artifacts, writings, recordings, and personal possessions of Reverend Ike. United Palace is also still in operation. After Reverend Ike's death, Xavier founded the United Palace of Cultural Arts, an organization which was separate from the church and meant to revitalize the building which had once been the center of his father's ministry. Today, the United Palace acts as a performing arts and cultural center. Comedians, musicians, and other live performers can reserve the space for their shows. Select movies are shown to honor the building's history as a movie theater. Today, the Ike encoders are no longer officially associated with the building. The science of living was a philosophy which placed the responsibility for people's destinies on their own minds. Believers were told that the key to their liberation was personal self-development. At first, these ideas appeared radical and empowering. They affirmed the equality of all humans regardless of race. They challenged mainstream religious systems, which legitimize suffering as a pathway to heaven. It tells marginalized people that they have agency. But the message was also convenient for a political landscape that was hurling towards austerity and social conservatism. The law of increase was for individuals alone and didn't apply to societal conditions at large. People also preferred to believe that they needed only to change themselves and not to protest, organize, or otherwise face a militarized, violent state. But this meant that Reverend Ike's teachings were more like the fundamentalist ideologies that he had tried to leave behind. Both frameworks taught that there was no use in trying to change the outside world. Both taught that people could only worry about themselves, either their own salvation or their own success. Both were methods of accepting the status quo. So far, billions of people live in poverty, violence, and instability, apparently not yet able to free themselves through the science of living.